Hello, my name is Andy Gilman and I'm the director of the Agora Foundation. In addition to our great book seminars and training for teachers, for about the past 10 years, we have been producing panels promoting civil discourse on complicated subjects. Those subjects have been both national and local. Topics include fracking, GMOs, tourism in Ojai, politics and media, and so on. This year, 2023, we will have a series of events on issues that are facing Ojai very directly and dramatically. These include housing, public education, tourism, water, and more. To that end, on January 31st, Tom Kraus, the Agora Foundation board president, and myself met with Richard Hajas. Richard is the board chair of the Casitas Municipal Water District and the board president of the Ojai Groundwater Management Basin. Richard met with us on a variety of subjects, some in key detail, and we hope this video can illuminate some of the issues that we're facing in our valley, especially after our recent rain. What's the current status? What are the plans? What worked? What needs to improve? And so on. We hope this is just the beginning as we kick off our series, trying to inform our public and working towards a community where we can work together, fact-based, moving towards a future that we all find flourishing. Thank you for your time and welcome here. We're very appreciative of you helping to inform the public because there is so much misinformation out there that we just want to get to the facts so that we can figure out what's the right strategy. So we have come up with a list of questions, but we want to have a free conversation, if that makes sense. And these questions have also gone out to some community members that we trust, and this is the consolidation of those questions. The first thing that seems to be on everyone's mind is, what are the latest measurements of Lake Casitas and our groundwater table after our recent storms?
Yeah, well, fortunately, we received over 21 inches of rain over the Ojai Basin, over the city, basically, and over 40 inches up on the ridge in the mountains where most of the water comes from. So the lake has come up a little over 27 feet, which is pretty significant, and we've increased our storage by about 30,000 acre feet, from 70,000 to a current level of about 104,000 acre feet. Now
So that's 40% as a percentage?
44%, I believe, is where we were at this morning.
Uh-huh.
Now, when you say it's increased 30,000 acre feet, if there's a rough take from the lake at about 14, is that right, roughly speaking?
Yeah, on average, it's
Okay,
14 to 15. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about essentially 2 years of safe yield take.
2 years of additional supply
Additional.
without any rain, yes. Well, 2 years of additional supply.
2 years of additional supply from the recent rainfall.
Right.
That's striking.
That's really wonderful, isn't it?
Yes, I mean,
That's
this
a lot.
It was a major relief for everyone
Yeah.
to get that. And that's typically how the rain comes. If you look at historically, we'll have dry year after year. Rarely do we get the average rainfall. We usually get something more or less. And then every few years we get something like this that brings us years worth of water. And it isn't over. This is early in the rainy season. We still have really 6 weeks of time where historically we get most of our rain.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to me. One of the questions that comes up when you think about this long term and think about, positive or negative, one of the kind of negative things you think of is, well, climate change is going on in a big way, and is the effect of that this is really a long-term problem, that we're just not going to get the sufficient rainfall. Does that make sense, or is that the wrong way to think about
Well,
it?
there's different theories. Trying to project the impacts of climate change, pretty much we have the same flaws that projecting tomorrow's weather. I mean, it's a lot of speculation. There are some theories that we will have longer dry periods followed by intense rain periods. So the net amount of rain we receive may not be that much different. temperature is probably the thing that we're most concerned about. If you increase the temperature by a significant amount, it increases evaporation.
Right.
So when you have surface storage, you lose more water than you typically would have lost.
And that's on the order of like 5,000 acre feet a year?
Yes, 5 to 7, depending on the level of the lake.
I mean, that's striking, but so think about it this way. A third of that take a year is evaporation.
It's about
Right.
a quarter.
Oh, a quarter.
About a quarter.
So when you give numbers like 5,000 acre feet, I don't know what that means in terms of the whole. So how many acre feet are there in the lake at full storage?
Now, there's 238,000 acre feet when it's full.
When it's full?
Yes.
Okay.
Currently have 105.
So 5,000 acre feet is a small percentage.
It's a small percentage, but it's not, it's a percentage you would pay attention to when you think of what gets taken from the lake every year, as was said, a
Yeah.
quarter.
Right.
A quarter goes to evaporation.
In developing a safe yield or sustainability yield, you have to include that evaporation in the equation. I mean, there's evaporation, there's system losses, which aren't that great, but we were looking at all outflows from the lake on an average annual basis. That's what we have to, we really have to manage that.
So how much do we need to take out of the lake every year in order to meet the requirements?
Well, originally, the safe yield is a number that's developed as part of the design of the facility. And the safe yield is the amount that can be taken out on average over the driest period, which is the period used for Lake Casitas was 1945 to 1965. So we could take a little over 20,000 acre feet a year out of the lake and before the lake would go dry. And that's not a very practical way to manage a water supply unless you have some other source. I mean, you don't want the lake to go dry. So last year, the Casitas board looked at reviewing the safe yield and looking at what is a sustainable amount of water that we can depend on out of the lake under current conditions. And with what we know about climate change, what we know about Matilaha and the impacts that may have, what the fishery requirements, what the impacts those have. And we came up with a number of around 15,000 acre feet a year of usage. Now on top of that there is evaporation and loss.
On top of that?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you use that number, we can take that amount of water out of the lake over the driest period, which is still 1945 to 1965, and not empty the lake, but not go below 40,000 acre feet of storage. So we raised that minimum from dead pool to 40,044, I think it is actually.
And how does that compare with what usage has been?
There were periods beginning in the early to mid 1980s where we were taking 20,000, delivering 20,000 plus on average every year. And that lasted until the drought in 1992, 89-92, where the district started to implement conservation program and allocation program to try to reduce that. There were several reasons for it. The city of Ventura was taking more water than they needed in the district, and Casitas was objecting at that time because it was revenue for Casitas, and the oil industry was taking significant amount of water, Shell and several others. Agriculture grew tremendously during that time. Not necessarily agriculture in areas that had their own water supply, but agriculture that spread out under the foothills, the Rincon area, Highway 150, a tremendous amount of agricultural growth there. So the amount of water used increased. Casitas' water rates were extremely low. A lot of pumpers in the Ojai Basin decided not to renovate wells. It was easier, more convenient to take water from Casitas. So in the late 80s, we made a great effort to try to encourage them to go back to their groundwater, and they did. Price has a lot to do with it, but they did.
Can I step back for 1 second? Because this comes up actually a lot. People get angry when they hear that Ventura uses any of Casitas at all, because they don't understand who built the lake. So maybe you could talk about who is the lake responsible to and how far geographically does it extend?
Yeah, the district boundaries extend all the way to Mills Road in Ventura. And the city of Ventura, through their property taxes, paid for a big percentage of the repayment of the Bureau of Reclamation loan. And they are entitled to water. They are our customer, our largest customer. They have other sources of water, so they don't rely on us exclusively, but our water is high quality and very inexpensive. So they naturally want as much of that as they can get. They have a limit. Now there's an allocation they can't exceed, and they're not anywhere close to that right now. I think they're probably between 35 and 4,000 acre feet a year, and they can go as high as 5, I believe, but they haven't done that in quite a long time.
And that's part of that safe yield number.
Yes.
And it also extends up to Highway 150 to Carpenter yet?
Yes, to the county line.
Okay.
And the bulk of it is, there's a large amount of agriculture above La Conchita. And then, of course, the avocados on Highway 150. It's a significant amount of agriculture that relies exclusively on Casitas water.
So it might be helpful to get a sense of the what does it take to maintain the status quo? So like for the last, say, just pick 3 years, we have used some amount of water, various things. And just as a baseline, how close are we to being able to project that, yeah, we can maintain the status quo for the foreseeable future? Or no, we got to make changes. We got to make changes. Something has to give that's different.
You know, that's the issue we're going to have to grapple with. We did something that's unusual. Instead of simply adopting a safe yield or a sustainable yield, we also adopted a ceiling on demand of about 15,000 acre feet. And we have been well under that for the past 5 or 6 years. I mean, well under it, between 10 and 12,000 acre feet. So it's very doable to manage the supply at that level. And if we do that, and our future climate projections are reasonable, it's a sustainable situation. I mean, there's really, without some catastrophic event, we should be able to maintain our supply fairly well.
And so that includes the agricultural user who would continue to do what they're doing. And it includes the residential user with the restrictions that have been placed already. What else?
Okay, let me add to your question, because this is where I think it's going. Every time there's a new development initiative in the city or in the valley, one of the issues is, well, do we have the water for it? How are we going to manage that? Which is what I think is embedded in what you suggested.
Yeah.
So if somebody were to say, we want to, just pick something, we want to have a new restaurant, a new hotel, a new affordable housing complex or something like that, how does Casitas see new development in the district?
Well, we've had a policy for quite some time where we issue a limit of 10 acre feet per year for new uses, other than ag. We don't issue any new agricultural allocations.
Okay.
And we've issued 2-3 acre feet a year for a long time. There just isn't that much development.
Can you give us just a reference point? So maybe how much does a house use, or how much does like the El Roblar Hotel projected to use?
Yeah, a typical house would use, the typical house without a lot of conservation is about a half an acre foot per year.
Okay.
That's a pretty common number. I'm not familiar with what that hotel is going to use, but the hotel is already in existence.
No, that's correct.
So, you know, renovations and improvements like that, it's a little bit different. Typically, we require, you know, extra conservation methods, and so does the city of Ojai, and so does the city of Ventura, to assure that you try to come as close as you can to zero,
Right.
you know, impact.
That's like fixtures and things like that, everything that's water consuming.
So there are some people saying we just shouldn't build anything new in Ojai because we don't have the water to support it. So even affordable housing will take more water, and we just shouldn't do that. What is that? Is that a sensible point of view, or is that overly conservative?
Well, based on the recent history and based on the sustainable yield we've adopted, there is room for some small amount of development. Someone came in here and wanted to put in a 12-story high-rise with 2,000 units. That would be an entirely different situation. But we don't see that happening. You know, like I said, the biggest amount of growth in the district over the past 20, 30 years is agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to, I mean, the challenge is going to be for the district is not to allow the demand to go back to where it was.
So there has been a limit placed on agriculture, and if we stick with that, that makes sense as a sustainable model.
It does, but there's going to have to be some, you know, very difficult policy changes to implement that, because the current policy is we have these stages, and the way they've managed it in the past is when a lake's full, it's take as much as you want. And then as the lake goes down, we start to ratchet down the amount. And for me personally, I don't think that's a good way to manage, because you wind up with the economy and people's quality of life a roller coaster ride, you know, based on whether it rained last year. So trying to come up with a stable amount that people can rely on, it may be a lot less than what they're used to in some cases, but we made it through this and literally cut it in half in some cases, and things aren't that bad. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to try to harden that demand so that it doesn't get out of control again.
So the existing model is, if it starts to look bad, then we put in restrictions sequentially.
Right.
And you're saying it might be beneficial, in your view as an individual, to have a different model for managing it. And what would an example of a different model be?
Well, an example would be stick to that demand, sustainable demand that we adopted, and do what we can to manage that. There's ways to do that. I mean, there's conservation efforts that can be applied. There's water rates, most effective of all. You know, those kind of things we're going to have to take a hard look at. And the choice is, do we spend tens of millions of dollars importing more water, not just on the capital project to do that, but the cost of that water? Or do we try to, you know, do the best we can and manage the supply that we have?
Yeah. Because if someone goes over their allocation, they're not cut off from the water, but they're charged a lot more.
Yes.
That's the way it is right now.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so basically there's a fiscal stick.
Yes.
And the thing that triggers action is depletion
That's right.
versus a broader, longer-term strategy. Now, that seems obvious to me as better. To my naive mind, that seems obvious. Is that controversial, that question? Like within the board, is that controversial?
It's an issue that's very difficult to address, because there's people who believe that they are entitled to more water than what they've received, you know, under the drought conditions. So how we're going to address that is going to be an issue.
This is now related in the train of thought. So the lake is one source of water, and then also we have our groundwater table. And so how do you feel that we have a reliable measure of the groundwater table and what that yields for the valley that we can use?
Yes, I think the Ojai Groundwater Management Agency has done a very good job primarily in developing the data and the modeling to really project what the impacts to the basin are under various conditions. And it's proving to be true. I mean, we're following those model projections fairly well. And the basin we use the safe yield. It's around 5,000 acre feet. And we can manage that because we have another supply. So you don't overdraft it, you don't pull it down below what your goal is.
Right.
Because you can get water from Lake Casitas. That's one of the reasons Casitas system was built. So it's a very reliable supply as long as it's managed correctly. And it's very difficult to overpump that basin under the current situation. For one thing, it's kind of self-regulating. A lot of the wells go dry. A lot of them reduce their output because the level goes down. So it just kind of gradually does its own thing. And, the lack of water is made up with Casitas water.
And what's the projected total amount in the basin? I realize that's kind of a difficult number probably, but.
Well, it's around 80,000 acre feet, but it's not all usable water.
We can't get to it all.
Realistically, probably half of that you could use.
Well, tell me if I'm not getting you right. So even if you said only half is accessible, let's say that's 40,000 acre feet, and the safe yield is 5,000, which we don't seem to maybe get to, that's a great supply underneath our feet.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. And with no rain, that 40,000 acre feet is 8 years.
Right.
And the basin's a lot different than the lake. Water's coming into it constantly. And, with the exception of last year, which was an extraordinary year, there are inflows to the basin. And like right now, the basin hasn't come up as dramatically as Lake Casitas, but it will over time. It'll continue to rise, and there's kind of a wave, that comes down, finally levels out. But it's an extraordinary basin, and it's a huge asset. And it is one of the reasons, there's two things that have created a lot of angst in the community. One is this idea that we're going to run out of water. The likelihood of us running out of water is slim and none. In worst case, the management of the supply would be taken over and wouldn't be allowed to simply run out. We'd have enough water for basic
the state
needs.
would take over.
Yeah, something would happen. But the only real way we would completely run out of water is if it didn't rain for years and years and years, and our entire state would be in an emergency situation. We wouldn't be here alone.
Right.
Plus, there's other supplies. The city of Ventura has multiple supplies. So if it was that kind of a crisis, they have the ability to reduce their take. They're not that reliant on Casitas, and they've done it. They've done it over this drought period. They reduced it significantly. Agriculture obviously would have to be cut back if it gets that dire, but the amount of water out of the 15,000, it's actually more than that, because if you look at the Ojai Basin, you're probably looking at 16 to 17,000 acre feet of water that's consumed on average annually. Only 4,000 of that is for business and residents.
So now the basin that you're referring to, what are the sources that regenerate new water that are coming into the basin?
Those mountains.
So rain, yeah.
San Antonio Creek is the main tributary, but Reeves Creek, Thatcher Creek, and then a series of other little canyons that flow. If you go up Gridley or just down Grand Avenue, you can see an enormous amount of water
Coming down.
and it doesn't typically go too far. It goes right into the ground.
Goes right into the
The aggregate in the alluvium is so large that it takes up water really fast.
And the way then that comes out through private wells.
Yes.
That are distributed around.
Yes.
And some of it must go to the river, right? Just naturally it would flow
Yeah.
also to the river.
Yeah. When you reach Jordan Keir at the last OBGMA was talking about what threshold there is for when the water actually leaves the basin. And if you get between, I think it's 5 and 8 cubic feet per second on San Antonio Creek, all of that water's taken up, assuming the basin isn't full. Once you exceed that 8 cubic feet per second, then the water flows out.
Got it. So can I ask, one of the questions that people ask is, what contributes to the lake recharging, what creek specifically, and then the diversion canal, the Robles diversion. So the question is water still flowing to the lake? I think the answer is yes. People keep showing videos on Facebook and so on. And how are they performing and what's expected? And then we should spend some time talking about the diversion.
Well, typically, about 60% of the water to the lake comes from the local watershed. That's Santa Ana Creek, Coyote Creek, and then all the small creeks around the shore of the lake. The Robles used to be probably 50%, but now it's closer to a third. For a variety of reasons. One, the Tillahaw doesn't function like it used to, and the other is we have limitations put on us by National Marine Fisheries to protect steelhead. One of the problems with this system is it was originally designed with Tillahaw in mind. If you're familiar with Boulder Dam, well, Boulder Dam is like a giant Tillahaw Dam to the Metropolitan Water District's California Aqueduct. Downstream of Tillahaw Dam is Parker Dam, and Parker Dam is where Metropolitan Water District diverts water off the Colorado River to send over to Los Angeles. And that dam, Parker Dam and Lake Havasu, act as a forebay. They slow the river down, they level it off, it's controllable, you're not getting a lot of sediment, you're not getting these flashes of flow through there. So it's a very relatively easy operation. Well, Robles isn't much different than that, with the exception that we don't have a continuous flow like the Colorado River. And when it was first built, the idea and the way we operated it is we would lower Tillahaw Dam level in the late fall, waiting for rain, get rain, and we would release the water that was coming into the creek and divert what we could, and then allow the flashes, these big downpours we have, to stored in the Tillahaw, chop the peaks off of the flows so that we don't have any debris and damage down at Robles. And then when the storm passed, and we'd lower it back down. We'd do that several times a year. And the yield from that was fairly significant, and it would protect Robles from some of these big flashes. Well, now that it essentially filled up with sediment, there's no surplus storage up there, and these flashes come over immediately.
You can see it, yeah.
It was spilled 12 and a half feet over the spillway in this last storm. Yeah. And it bringing debris with it now. It's not being held back as much by Tillahaw. And that debris fills Robles forebay. And without a calm forebay to control the flow into the canal, you lose control. In this case, the river wound up on the other side.
It broke that barrier. Right. Yeah.
And that's common in this kind of a storm. What's different is we used to be able to go in there with equipment and redirect the stream, reestablish a pond, but regulators won't let us do that anymore. And we did.
Why?
Because of the steelhead.
Because doing that, how does that affect the steelhead?
Well, you might harm one.
By being in there with the equipment?
Right. So we were able to get an emergency permit to go in and plug up the break in the dam and get the river redirected.
Which was done almost immediately.
Yes,
right?
that was done almost immediately.
So the two things seem to occur to me about that. One, there's the question of is it a good policy to have this much influence on the welfare of the steelhead? But let's assume that is a good policy. Let's assume that that makes sense, that the environmentalist concern is a reasonable one. Just assume that's the case. Then are we doing it as well as we could do it? In other words, it sounds like if we're really concerned, if we can't put equipment into a place where it will cause more water to flow into the lake because we're afraid that we'll bump into a steelhead and hurt it, I mean, that doesn't sound reasonable, even if you think the environmental case is strong, to my naive mind anyway.
To me, this is the single biggest misconception or misunderstanding or question that people have is they'll say, it starts raining, they see water flowing down the river day one, and they say, why is this going into the lake? Or why is there any sort of delay period? And then secondly, why can't we go in and fix it right away?
Yeah, and it's frustrating to drive over one of those bridges and watch that water going down. But the reality is our ability to capture it, particularly when it's flowing that heavily with debris. I mean, you look at that and you think of water, but it's almost like a slurry. It's just rock and sand and debris, and it's very hard to control. And if we allow, one of the reasons Casitas was not built on the Ventura River is to avoid having that happen, where all that silt goes into the lake. So if in less severe storms, what typically would happen is after a few days, the water would clear up and we'd be able to divert. This was severe. I mean, if you look at the creek channels and river channels now, you don't even recognize them anymore. All of those trees, all of that brush, all of that stuff came down and plugged everything up, and it took a couple of weeks really to get it really cleaned out. Now the silt is coming in, and the silt's actually going into the canal because the silt level is equal to the spillway on the canal. So they're constantly fighting, trying to get enough flow to send that stuff downstream and manually clean out the part that's gone into the canal and plugs up the screens. So it's a real battle, and I don't really have an answer for it. Part of the problem is we haven't had that much experience with this. These new rules were put in place after 2004, and some of the equipment that was put in and the redesign of the facility and the fish screens were put in, we really haven't had much chance to operate it and figure out how it works. So, that is a problem.
Because it hasn't rained.
It hasn't rained. It hasn't rained. Yeah.
So can't we learn from other other places who have taken this on as a design and said, let's redesign it so that it's not such a problem, so that somehow the design is conducive to the water flowing where we want it to flow?
Yeah, I don't know that it's a pretty unique watershed. For one thing, it's very short and really flashy. So trying to control it and a big chunk of our water comes during those periods. See? So trying to control it is tough. The Bureau of Reclamation is looking at some redesigns that are supposed to mitigate the problems we're going to have if they take Matilla Dam down. I've only seen one of them, and I really don't have an opinion on whether it would work or not. But I think we are going to have to really think hard about how we're going to go about this. And it comes to how much is it going to cost to take this 1/3 of the supply off this river? I mean, it becomes more and more expensive, and the yield becomes lower and lower. So unless we can come up with a method that we can rely on, we're going to have to be careful about spending money on it. It is, it's a lot of water, but it's not, in the scheme of things, it's probably 22% of our total supply on the watershed, and now. So it's something we're going to have to think about. Hopefully there are some engineering fixes to it. They're looking at trying to get permission to get larger screen openings, and they installed brushes on there to brush them, and all that stuff. It works, but how long it lasts and how efficient it is, it's hard to say. Again, we haven't had a lot of experience is part of the problem.
Is there a projection, just looking at the flow from the creeks and the diversion canal, how much is flowing in? Is there some projection about how much we could expect to get over the next month, would you say?
If it doesn't rain?
If it doesn't rain.
If it doesn't rain, we're pretty steady at 200 to 300 acre feet a day. And it's probably half from the local watershed and half from the river.
That sounds like a lot.
Yeah, well, that's a month's worth in the wintertime of demand. And, it should flow for quite a while. And hopefully we get a little more rain. It'll keep it even today. I mean, it keeps things saturated and keeps everything flows off now, so.
So some people would say, I think, the community ought to be able to decide how it wants to handle this. That is, you can't both take care of the steelhead and get as much water as possible into the lake. So you have to allocate that somehow. And some people would think, well, it's our community. We should be in a position to make that call as a community. But as I understand it, we're not. As I understand it, it's a federal agency that has the power to say, this is how you are going to handle this issue.
That's correct. Well, the entire Endangered Species Act is pretty controversial. I mean, when you look at its original intent, I think, the postcards were about the bald eagle and the grizzly bear and the polar bear or whatever, and we've taken that down to, something like rainbow trout is basically where we're at right now. So, yeah, how many people really support this concept? If they knew exactly what the repercussions were, probably the majority would probably say, I don't know. But the law is very rigid. I mean, we were faced with people getting arrested out there the other day if we didn't pull that equipment out.
Wow. So now that is a law.
It is a law.
It's not a regulation from an agency.
The way it works is that Congress passed the Endangered Species Act. It was probably 2 or 3 paragraphs, and the regulators filled in the blanks.
And now it's a gigantic agency.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it works. But from a water agency perspective, from my role on the water board and my role in the past as managing it, it wasn't my role to question the validity of the regulatory agency or the law. My role was to figure out how to make it work. Yeah. And I think that's where, that's what Casitas has to do. That's its responsibility. It has to figure out how to make this work and you get the best benefit to the community without violating these regulations and these laws. I mean, we can do, a little bit of political arm twisting and then that sort of thing to try to reduce some of this. And we have had some success at that. I mean, we've been able to, the staff has gotten permits to do some work in there and they just have to keep pounding to try to get the okay to do it because the regulators, they'd just rather you didn't do anything. But I think it's a matter of trying to figure out how to make it work. And there's a tendency to use the law and lawyers and use politicians to solve these kind of problems. My view is we should be using engineers. Figure out how to make it work. Because legal remedies and political remedies are ephemeral. They can change the law, politicians come and go, but engineering solutions typically last much longer.
Got it.
That makes sense.
It does to me too.
Yeah.
Can I ask maybe the final question on that? Are we seeing any evidence of trout increasing? In other words, is it paying off?
No, well, that's a problem. Again, we didn't have any rain. So if there were any trout in there last year, they were tough, I'll tell you, because there was no water.
Right.
So how they, we haven't had a period, whatever normal is, to see how anything that we've done or anything that the regulators have done, and whether it's improved anything or not. There are fish there, but right now is an ideal time. I mean, this is the first time the sandbar has been broken at the mouth of the river. So if there are any out there, they do have the opportunity to come up.
Yeah.
And so this will be an event that we'll see if there is any return.
That would be good to see.
You know.
Just now back to the lake and our water connections or resources. There seems to be, there's two kind of state water projects in the works, one up 150 and one down 33. Is that right? So the 150 is a potential connection to Kachuma. Am I getting that right?
Yeah,
Long term?
yeah, there are two.
Okay.
One is through Santa Barbara County, and Santa Barbara County has access to state water. So we were looking at making a connection with Carpinteria, which was the end of the line there in the county, and right near our existing pipeline facility, to be able to bring water, or some of our state water allocation through that system. The second one is a pipeline from the Hajas Water District that would go from Camarillo to Saticoy, basically, across the river in Ventura. That one is capable of delivering as much as 5,000 acre feet of water to us and an additional amount to the city of Ventura. That one, we don't have a plan or any design on how we would get it from there to Lake Casitas. But it has benefit in that it would give the city of Ventura another supply, so if we needed them to cut back, they theoretically could just take that water instead.
So we would use it as a credit.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay.
It's possible. There's no formal agreement to do any of that, but the fact that it's there, it's that much closer in the future. If we find a way to extend it, we can do that.
What's the projected possible yield of the 150 connection?
About 2,000 acre feet,
Okay,
which is not a whole lot of water,
but something.
but it's expensive water. So,
Right.
you know, I think, again, I'm just speaking for myself. My view is it's an insurance policy. I think we'd be better off managing things so that we don't need that water, but it's there in the event something happens.
Yeah.
You know, the same thing with the one coming from Callegas.
So we've had this conversation before, all three of us. It seems to me, and tell me if I'm being naive or just overly optimistic, there are districts that are completely attached to the state water project and they're getting almost all their water from that. That's not us. We're isolated, mostly speaking, but we're in pretty good shape. That's how it appears to me.
Today.
Today.
No, we are. I mean, we always have been. I mean, I think we are the only area on the south coast that has its own independent supply, that is not connected to the state.
So that's just hugely important,
I think so, too.
and it's different than the common view of the citizen of Ojai, if I get it right. I mean, among the people that I know and talk to about these things, the general view is this is a kind of insolvable, inevitable, terrible problem that isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
Isn't that right? Isn't that the way you?
I mean, we've been doing these panels since 2015, and that's been a predominant view is connecting to state water is the insurance policy, but that we're running out and we better figure out something fast. But it seems to me we're hearing now that districts that are reliant on the state water project are not getting what they have been promised. That was in the LA Times not that long ago.
That they're actually in more danger than we are.
I think
That's
so.
what I just heard.
I think so.
Yes, I would never support using it as a base supply, only as a supply to supplement,
The state water.
you know,
Yeah.
supplement, it's too expensive for one thing, but to supplement periods when, you know, there's room in the lake and maybe we want to reserve some. I mean, it would be a management tool for future management of the district. And I think a very valuable one. But not being reliant on that takes us out of a lot of the regulatory and mandated
Right.
issues that are falling on the rest of the agencies that rely on state water.
Let's pause.
So the message isn't forget about water. Everything's fine. We're all set. We don't have to worry about conservation. That's not the message.
No, that's not the message.
But the message is with careful planning and careful strategies and a lot of diligent effort, this can be managed.
Yes, I believe it can. I think one thing that we have to recognize, we depend on rainfall. We have to have rainfall. And like I said earlier, if the lake were full today, there's really only, and we managed our water use within a sustainable level, we'd only have about 10, maybe 12 years of supply if it didn't rain at all. That's not very much when you think about it. We currently have 5. So in the scheme of things, we're in pretty good shape. But if it rains.
5 years.
Yes.
5 years with no rain, we can go for 5
Yes,
years.
yes.
And now, we talked about this before, but just to be sure we understand, how, as a percentage, how much new water came into the lake from the recent rainfall? So we went from X to Y. How much of a percentage increase is that?
When you do the math, it was around 70,000 acre feet, and now it's 100, so,
70 to 100.
yeah, so it's about
That's
Almost 50%.
40%,
Yeah.
40-some
40,
percent.
40-some
Yeah,
percent,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's really a
It's
lot.
striking. to
It's a
me.
lot of
Yeah,
water.
that's a
Yeah.
good-
No,
Yeah.
and it is, it's hard to get a hold of that.
Yeah.
The volumes are tremendous. So it's remarkable. In that short a period of time, we were able to capture that much water. And in spite of the difficulties that we had to deal with on Robles, we still were able to capture that much water and are continuing to do so.
And that's the lake. There's a similar amount of groundwater
Yes,
that has been
yes.
captured as
Oh,
well. Yeah.
That's really good.
And that doesn't and that doesn't speak to all of the groundwater along the Ventura River.
Right.
That Ventura River County Water District and Miners Oaks, that's where they produce their water. Those areas are all filling up too.
That's right. Do you know off the top of your head, the city of Ojai, so within the city limits, is it about 1.8 acre feet, or sorry, 1,000 acre feet or so, 1,800 acre feet?
It's about, well, historically it was as high as 18, I believe,
Okay.
but it's typically, the last few years, it's been around 12.
Okay, because that's, if you remember from 2016 or 2015, the amount of use from the lake fell dramatically when the whole area responded to the drought. So
Yep.
that's been exciting.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the lawsuit that a lot of us know about and have been following. So can you just, in the briefest way, describe the lawsuit and then where we're at, and especially what people in the basin can expect in the future?
Well, the lawsuit is a result of the Endangered Species Act. And, the Santa Barbara Channel Keeper sued the city of Ventura as well as the state of California for not protecting the species. And the city of Ventura pumps water at Foster Park, and during a very dry period when they pump water, the stream flow can go almost to nothing if they pump a lot. So they sued and said that they needed to basically cease. The city of Ventura looked upstream and said, well, we're not the only ones doing this. Why should we have to, be the target of all of this? And so they filed this watershed-wide lawsuit, which probably was a bad decision at the time. But in the meantime, we're in mediation right now. We're not in mediation. The state isn't a party to that yet, but all of the parties on the watershed are in that mediation, and I think it's going fairly well. I mean, I think we have reaching common cause and trying to move forward with something that doesn't jeopardize our water supply and satisfies the requirements of steelhead.
Who's in the room in the mediation?
The main parties are Casitas, City of Ventura, City of Ojai, Ventura Water District, Miners Oaks Water District, a group of large pumpers, agricultural pumpers. There's a group of pumpers on the Ventura River as well.
And did I understand correctly that homeowners in the basin have been removed from the lawsuit, or is that?
Yes, we've worked out an exemption
Okay,
for those parties.
right.
Did the Channel Keepers folks try to discuss this with water authorities before filing the lawsuit?
I don't know. I wasn't involved in that at the time. I'm really not sure. It's really hard to say. It's been a problem for some time, so both parties probably knew it was an issue.
I mean, it just seems like the amount of havoc and the amount of resource that has gone to settling all of this the question in my mind is that proportionate to the issue? In other words, you know, could there have been a better way of handling that? Could they have said, hey, look, you're not following the law, and you're obliged to, and, you know, why don't you? And let's talk about it, because we're serious, we're not going to back away from this. It seems like that would be the basis of some kind of negotiation then and there. It's easy, in a way, it's easy if it's a nonprofit and you have resources, it's easy to file a lawsuit and cause all kinds of trouble. Right. I'm not saying that's what they did, I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, again, I wasn't involved in it at that stage. I know city was warned about the issue on many occasions, and then the drought exacerbated the situation.
Right.
And, you know, I don't know how the city was responding. The city of Ventura was responding to that, whether they were just ignoring it or what they were doing. But, you know, ultimately it wound up the way it is. I don't think at this point it isn't terrible. You know, I think we're making a lot of progress on the mediation.
Do you envision that basically all the parties that you just mentioned would come together with a unified voice to the state about what needs to happen in the river?
Yeah, I think if we can come up, you know, they call it a physical solution to adjudication. If we can come up with a physical solution that meets everyone's demands and doesn't harm too many people, and I think good chance.
Is there a projected timeline for that?
Well, we had a 6-month
Stay,
and now we have another 6-month stay that I think is up in May or June.
Right.
I would expect, we're making progress, so I'd expect it would be extended. But it's a long, drawn-out process. Probably not as bad as some. I mean, you have Mojave River adjudication, the Antelope Valley adjudication.
Well, I was reading some of those, they take 15 years to adjudicate the whole area,
Yeah.
so this sounds like it would be less than that.
Yeah, this one, we're not trying at this point to allocate out water, so it makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, those are terrible, and they don't end. One party's unhappy, they go to court. I know right now, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, they just filed an adjudication lawsuit. I don't know who filed it, but it affects everyone, Oxnard and all of those farmers out there. Las Posas, I think Las Posas may be close to settling, but I'm not sure.
So the Ojai Chautauqua is interested this year in focusing on the big issues that the Ojai Valley faces. And this is certainly one of them. This is certainly up at the top of the list. So we appreciate being able to talk with you about it in this way. It's really very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I think I have always tried not to paint a bleak picture. I mean, there was people running around and the sky was falling, we were going to run out of water, and that was never the case. You know, there are solutions. It does take time, and you have to look at all of them. You can't just pick one and say that's gonna solve the problem. But I think we're in. You know, this rain is very nice, and hope it keeps coming. But it's given us some time, which is important time to kind of fine tune what we want to do.
Yeah.
And we're not under the gun, and we can't wait too long. But we do have a time to take a breath here.
Let me just ask two small follow-on points. One is preparing for Matilaha Dam and its removal. What kind of things is Casitas looking at if that comes to pass, or when that comes to pass?
Well, the Bureau of Reclamation owns the Rolless facility, so they're looking at some alternative designs. Like I said, I've seen one of them, but I haven't seen the others. I will say that I don't know that anyone has a really good handle on what the impacts of that are going to be. I mean, you're talking about 75 years of sediment that's going to come down that river. It's going to change that river dramatically, and in some ways might not be something we want to see. So they're going to have to be very careful about how they do that. It, you know, it could render Robles completely inoperative. It can plug up the groundwater supplies that we have along that river with the sediments that are in that.
They would just run to the river. They wouldn't sink to the ground. It wouldn't sink in the ground.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Like that happened in the Thomas Fire, if I remember right. Okay. And then the second final question I wanted to ask is, there seems to be a lot of initiatives that are small scale, but saving water here and there. There's projects like at Thatcher School that the city's taking on and so on. How does Casita see all of those projects? Does it work with some of those providers and things like that? So how do you see that kind of partnership working?
I think all of those are, good ideas. I think you can't rely on Casitas to do everything. I think the city of Ojai has been participating in some of those grants and trying to help out with some things that could be done within the city limits. A lot of the farmers have been working with some of them, so they're all good things. And I doubt if you can implement all of them, but there are some that could be very beneficial, particularly to recharging the shallow portion of the Ojai groundwater basin, so that we have continuous flows to the San Antonio Creek.
Where's that? Where's the shallow portion?
Pretty much under the city of Ojai.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that portion of the basin, we don't produce water out of it. It's not very thick, and it actually overflows into the creek. And it also provides water that keeps the oak trees and the sycamores alive during the dry periods. But it's an area that, we could enhance the recharge to that. We never lost, with the exception of about 3 months this last fall. It was the first time we experienced completely dry conditions at Camp Comfort.
Oh, right, okay.
And that's with a pretty severe drought.
Right.
So if we could do a few things to enhance that, it would be very, very helpful. And anything that saves water is a good thing.
Anything you would ask of the Ojai community?
Great question.
Like what's the citizen? Can the citizen do anything here that would be helpful to what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think look at how you weathered this drought, and take a look at, were things that bad? Were you able to maintain a reasonable landscape on your property? Was the local community able to maintain its parks and its schools? I think they have. I really do, without too much damage. So I think taking a look at how you're going to sustain that long term, because we may have reached a point where if we keep doing what we're doing, we may be okay. Don't get excited about planting more grass or or doing that kind of thing, and just take a look. I mean, there's some landscapes that were done that are very nice. I think some people went to extremes for whatever reason, and they killed off everything on their property, and they may now want to say, well, now we want to come back with more landscaping. Well, that's fine, but do something that fits the environment. Don't go back in with
The Ojai Valley Inn going to survive? Golf course is going to be there?
My understanding is they're going to redo their golf course and do more of a, what you call it, it's where you have narrow fairways.
I've heard that too,
Yeah.
and I've heard they're going to do some major engineering stuff to get at water use.
Yes.
Improve water use.
Yeah.
And that's appropriate. I mean, that's what you'd want
Absolutely.
them to do.
Absolutely. Everybody has a stake in this.
Yeah.
And ultimately, boils down to, water isn't going to get any cheaper.
Right.
So everything you do to conserve, everything you do to get your average use in kind of a steady state, you're going to survive the economic pressure of increased rates, because there's no way to avoid it.
And the farmers are not going to have to go out of business. I mean, you see a lot of orange trees that used to be there that aren't there anymore.
Yes. Yeah, and that is a concern. They may be back. But I think the farmers who have access to another supply long-term are in pretty good shape, because they just rely on casitas for supplemental supplies. They're getting hit with pumping charges and that sort of thing, but it's still not, it's not extreme at this point. So I think long-term, I think it's a sustainable business here. Some of the others that are up on the mountainside and rely 100% on casitas, I don't know. It's, you know, it's long-term. You're going to have a pretty high-value crop
Yeah.
to do that. And you know, some of them do. I mean, it's like the Rincon, the avocados there. I mean, but how sustainable avocado orchards are long-term, I don't know. They're kind of a fragile
We've seen other
tree.
regions make changes like almonds and things like that. People are redoing what they grow based on the supply.
It also seems to me a very positive thing that the community is supporting the agency in such a way as to make this kind of progress. I mean, one might hope that education in Ojai, public education in Ojai, would have something similar, or that affordable housing might function in a similar kind of a way. I mean, it'd be nice to have a community that actually was able to come together, recognizing the diversity of various points of view, and figure out how to make it work.
Yes. Yeah, we waste a lot of energy arguing over entrenched positions
Yeah.
that have no basis, really.
Well, entrenched positions, but positions that actually aren't grounded in facts.
Right.
So that's what we face quite a bit, is just trying to explain, yes, there's an issue and we need to pay attention to it, and here are the possible solutions, but let's start with what is. Well, I think we made some headway today on that front.
Yeah, it's great. Good to talk to you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.